And for those of you in the room, there's still time. If you need any extra supplies to create a good sitting place for yourself, you can check the closet for a different size cushion, or in the corner here, or blankets or support cushions, whatever you might need. And I forgot we should have chant books. We're going to do the 5 Remembrance chant on page 26. So maybe a couple of you could pass them out. They're just inside the closet, and make sure everybody has one. And for those of you online, I've been putting in the chat, and I'll do that again, the resources here. And if you open up this document, you'll find the chant that we're going to do today. So take a moment. You can take a look at the chant. And this is a nice one to commit to memory. It's like our morning cup of coffee. This is our morning grounding, really, into the simple, shouldn't be, but often is, surprising facts of life. And Ruth, it's okay to leave that open. It actually helps the ventilation. Yeah, page 26. And then Jessica, maybe you can help me repost the Sunday resources for folks as people show up. And maybe it's a nice time to do a shout out to Jessica, who's been one of our main tech supporters for so many of our programs. Thank you, Jessica, for doing that. So let's do this chant to begin our time this morning. The 5 remembrances, or sometimes it gets translated as the 5 subjects for frequent recollection. And you'll see at the bottom, the Buddha encourages us to do this regularly. And if you're new to the practice, you might just want to listen and let the words have the impact that they have, whatever that might be. I am of the nature to age. I have not gone beyond aging. I am of the nature to sicken. I have not gone beyond sickness. I am of the nature to die. I have not gone beyond dying. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. I am the owner of my karma, heir to my karma, born of my karma, related to my karma, abide supported by my karma, Whatever karma I shall do, for good or for ill, of that I will be the heir. Thus we should frequently recollect. And let's take the time, settle into a posture that's comfortable enough. It won't be perfect, of course. Balancing this usefulness of being upright with the usefulness of sitting in a comfortable way, where the body can trust enough to soften, where we're not afraid to feel the sensations that are here in the body. Feeling at home in the body. And it's helpful when you have your morning sit, like we're all able to do together now. It's really helpful not to rush into some technique. It's almost like we're befriending our life, befriending the sitting body just as it is, and befriending the sensitive, feeling heart, tender heart just as it is right now. Maybe for some it feels quite numb, and for others it might feel quite hot and agitated. Maybe for others it's quite cool, peaceful. But whatever the quality of the heart now, we practice befriending it, not afraid to feel the body, not afraid to be aware of the heart. And also we can open, acknowledge the activity in the mind, the thoughts, the views, ideas, attitude. And we're grounding ourselves, we're grounding our practice in this radiant, this radiant truth that it's like this now. And of course, it doesn't mean it's the way we want it to be, but it is definitely the way that it is right now. All this movement of sensation and emotion and mental activity and sound and sight and touch. Some people call this the whole catastrophe of our life, the movement of our life. And not surprisingly, it really matters how we're relating right now. Whether the habit, the deepest habit is to relate with fear or control, as if our life is some wild beast that, or even worse, some kind of demon that we need to manage and control and somehow keep in its prison, because who knows what it would do if it ever got out. And of course, that is one way to be relating to the present moment, this hyper parental attitude. But if the conditions, the circumstances now feel safe enough, suitable enough, might be a good time to practice relaxation and trusting and softening, allowing the heart to relate in a more open, fearless way to the conditions that are here and moving here. Even the simple question, does the heart, body need to be defended or armored in any way right now? What would happen if the heart became more undefended, soft and open? Is the heart in danger now? Or is it okay to soften and relax and allow one of the one of the deepest lessons we learn in life generally that there's always this choice that's being made. Either we're making the choice to try to manage and control and be defended, or the heart is making this choice to open and be a learner. We can't really learn the deeper lessons while we're operating or relating from this place of fear, identified with the fear. And there's really a world of difference between being interested, actually interested in the experience of anxiety and the experience of fear, and acting, relating according to what the fear is saying, is telling us. Different versions of being tight. And this path that the Buddha teaches, it's all about relating to the movement of life, the movement of the present moment as our teacher, our uncompromising, beloved teacher. And hopefully you've learned our teacher never speaks in words. Its teachings come through this unfolding river of experience. And basically it's teaching us the same lesson. When I relate in this way, things get tight. When I relate in another way, everything feels more free and released and open and unrestricted and beautiful. So when we're sitting for the rest of this sit, let's relate to our teacher in this skillful way. Let it teach us the difference between when I relate with this attitude, everything gets tight, and plant seeds for more tightness, more contraction, more heaviness. And when I relate in these other ways, everything begins to open up and feel more free, more released, more full of an authentic love, an uncontrived love. And the question is, do we really currently know the difference between what is onward leading to constriction and what is onward leading to release? And our classroom is right here and now, this opening to the present moment, and in a sense, more specifically, opening to the sensitive heart, the way it is, here, right in the middle. Caring enough about the sensitive feeling heart to stay close, to keep it in mind, to not forget it. So it will teach us everything that needs to be learned. It reflects back whether the mind is relating in a helpful or an unhelpful way. It can be felt directly. And you can connect this with a more ordinary anchor. So it could be something like breathing in, sensitive to the feeling heart. Breathing out, willing to be sensitive to the feeling heart. And we're not making demands on the feeling heart, telling ourselves how it should feel, trying to get to a better feeling, but instead we're doing our best to practice being close, undefended, willing to feel the feeling heart, whatever that might be, willing to be close. So let's continue in silence now for about 20 minutes. So again, just as a simple reminder, practice keeping the sensitive, feeling heart in mind. And you can coordinate this with your ordinary rhythm of breathing in and out. So for each in-breath, for each out-breath, just remember, oh, the heart's like this. Practice being open and sensitive, feeling what you feel. Just as best you can, keeping it in mind. It's as if with each breath we're ventilating the feeling heart with awareness, this non-judging, kind, tender-hearted awareness, allowing the heart to feel the way it feels, to be the way it is. the motivation for this practice we're doing today is really this movement of love. There is this life here. Of course, it's quite a mystery, our life, this body and mind, this sensitive heart. But for sure, there is this life here. And because of love, I vow to stay close and to feel what's here to feel. It no longer makes sense to me to be numb or disconnected or unaware. So I resolve to keep this sensitive heart and mind, to be willing to feel the feeling here, to feel the different movements here in the body, in the heart and mind. And I resolve to begin again and again every time I forget and get lost, caught up in the dramas and the reactive patterns, to immediately relate with forgiveness, patience, kindness, and to begin again. How's the heart now? What's the feeling here? Is it okay? Is it safe enough to be close? Is it possible to be curious and patient as I feel what's here to feel? And practice keeping it in mind. So no matter how it is now, maybe the heart feels like twisted steel. Maybe it's a hot mess. Maybe it's radiant and serene and peaceful. But the question remains, can I just allow this heart to be what it is right now, to be close and allowing, giving it permission, letting nature, the nature of the heart, move. That's what nature does. It keeps moving and changing and unfolding. And in this way, we're letting our teacher teach this exposure to our lives, to the feeling here in the middle. And you can sense perhaps this first real taste of liberation. We become the one who's not afraid to feel the way it feels. And there's some real freedom in not being afraid to feel the way it feels now. Not to have to tighten up, not to have to distract ourselves, but instead learning to let everything move and letting everything feel the way it feels. Trusting our capacity to soften and relax a little bit more as best we can. Coming out of that trust, we relax and allow. And all of this really is an expression of self-love or compassion, which is really then our gift to each other, allowing other people to be who they are. Imperfect, of course, but not afraid of learning, at least over time, to not be afraid of the imperfections we see in our loved ones and then in the wider world. And in that way, we learn how to keep showing up and responding in a more enlivened, fearless ways in our lives. So may this all be true. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes and adjust your body how you need to, so that you'll be comfortable enough. And again, a big welcome, everyone in the room here. I'll just give people online a brief tour of the community in the room. It's so nice. Since early July, we began to have people back in the room on Sunday morning. So that's sweet. We also have Sunday evening, and then Wednesday evening with Shelley when Shelley is not on retreat, where they are right now, finishing up a month-long retreat. I think one more week. Shelley will be back in early August, teaching again on Wednesday evenings, as well as the half-day retreat in early August. Shelley will lead. And most of you know this, but for those of you who are new to the community, we have this central spiritual practice we call dana. It's not just meant in terms of how you relate to the center, but really how we relate to everyone and everything in our lives. And it's this a little bit similar to how we were practicing today during the guided meditation, you know, the sensitivity of the heart. And one of the things that sensitivity to our heart reveals is everything's in motion. Have you noticed? It's like it isn't a static thing when we feel our heart. It feels quite alive. And the more we attune to the qualities of our heart, we feel that circle of giving and receiving. And so in Buddhism, sometimes we say we live, we operate, we exist in this relational world. And it's a beginning of dropping whatever materialistic, fundamentalist idea you have about life, about the world. You know, we were tadpoles, then we were fish, and now we have a body, and inside the body's a brain, and inside that brain somehow the mind and heart arise. That's the materialist view, which is interesting story. That can be useful in kind of figuring things out, but we should hold that view lightly. That's my opinion, and I think the Buddha might say something similar. I mean, he definitely taught very strongly not to cling to any fixed views. including materialism for sure. He definitely rejected materialism as a ultimate truth. And so what might be more useful as a relative truth, because it aligns with our subjective experiences, everything seems to be moving, and everything seems to be relational. Like we're always relating to the present moment. And in a way, the way we're relating contributes something to the present moment, right? We get something back in that circle of giving and receiving. We can't help it. And that's true with our lovers and our children and our cats and dogs and our neighbors and our workplaces and our communities and our wider world. We're in relationship and we're always giving, whether we know it or not, and we're always receiving something back. We're receiving, you could say, the karmic fruit of how we're relating. That's what we get back. So common ground in your relationship to common ground is just a way to practice that circle. Nobody can tell us how to do it. It would be so much easier if somebody said, this is how you come into relationship with your partner. This is how you come into relationship with your cat or your Dharma center or whatever. But we have to find our own way. But we have the sensitivity of our heart to give us feedback. We keep the heart in mind and we realize, oh, I like it or not, I do have a relationship with Common Ground Meditation Center. How does it feel? How does it feel? And we keep experimenting until it feels good. It's a cause for happiness, a sense of safety. It's like the ongoing taste or the ongoing reverberation, it feels good. If we're overcommitted, if we give too much, if we make it too much of our life, when we check in and see how it feels, it won't feel good. Maybe we feel codependent, or maybe we feel like the weight of common ground rests on my shoulders. I felt that way at times, right? And it's unhealthy. It's not the way for me to be in relationship to common ground. For me, it's more complicated. It's my workplace and I'm the co-founder and things like that. But each of us, we feel in and we experiment. And if we neglect our relationship, we'll notice, well, how does that feel? Until the relationship, whenever we attune, it leaves a good taste. It's like, oh, that feels really good. No unpleasant reverberations, no need to make amends. And it becomes like each of our relationships we bring this kind of awareness to, they become these alive monuments to wisdom and love. So if you have like a really clean, wholesome, beautiful, alive relationship with your four-legged friend, whatever that is in your life, or your neighbor's kid, or some uncomplicated relationship where it's more easy to do this, then that relationship, whenever you remember it, whenever it's there sort of in the forefront, it really is a kind of monument to the possibility of being in relationship in a way that's liberating and free and leaves a good taste and a cause for happiness, right? And it's a joy whenever you remember that relationship, let alone have a chance to interact with that place, that person, that creature, or whatever it is, the birds at your bird feeder. And you see, the more we bring this kind of wisdom, awareness, loving awareness to more and more relationships, then our whole life starts to come alive, to be a support of happiness and love and wisdom. And we begin, just starting where it's relatively easy. And we bring these teachings in. Okay, there's so much we don't have control over, but I definitely get to participate in terms of how I'm relating. So when you come to Common Ground, when you think of Common Ground, when you come on a Zoom meeting with Common Ground, whenever you're in relationship with Common Ground, the teachers, the community, these teachings, feel it as a living thing, that relationship. And there's a feeling there as all that movement moves. How does it feel? Can it feel even more enlivening, more healing, more supportive, more good? Well, let me see. Let me play with how I'm relating, how I'm showing up, how I'm receiving, how I'm giving. And maybe for some of you, this seems like a pretty radical way to meet our annual budget or things like that, or to support our teachers and staff so they can have a reasonable livelihood. But it's worked now for 29 years, this circle of giving and receiving. We don't fundraise really. We don't talk about money except as the spiritual practice. But of course, if you have practical questions about how you want to get involved in that circle of giving and receiving, just talk to me, or you could talk to Ruth, who's in the room somewhere over here, who's our program host tonight or today, this morning. And just check in and we'll give you any specific information you need. You could always check with on the website, we have more information. And in the link in the chat, for those of you who are online, you can find more information about that. But it's just good for me to mention that. And I encourage other people who've been in the community for several years, feel like you've been thoughtful about that circle, that it doesn't always have to be me in the programs that I lead, giving the Dana talk, we call it. You know, Dana is generally translated as generosity. It's a Pali word, but we sometimes leave it untranslated. We use that word Dana because it's so much richer than how we, in our own language system, you know, we think of generosity as a heavy should, you know, oh, I should do something here. And that's not the idea. The idea is find a way to be more enlivened and liberated through the inevitability. We are in relationship. To be in denial is a particular strategy that I suggest doesn't work very well. Like to be in relationship with a partner, but to not want to be in that relationship or to pretend you're not in relationship is not a very healthy strategy for having a partner or a pet or a neighbor or any kind of relationship. What seems the basic principle that seems to work is to be more and more conscious of all the relationships we're inevitably in. Initially, it's scary. It's like, I don't want the responsibility of having to be in relationship with my life, my body, my own mind, let alone all of you, all of this. Get me out of here. And to some degree, we all check out that strategy of get me out of here, it's too much. So hopefully we're paying just enough attention to realize it doesn't really work to disconnect, to not to want to be in relationship, because it comes with life. You know, it is a relational life or world that we live in. There's really no alternative. So I'll leave some time. You know, we usually end at 11:45. And those of you in the room and those of you online, there will be some time. Now, it's just optional, of course, but you can stay here at 11:45 or stay on the Zoom meeting. And Shannon, I believe, is here today to help us organize the online small groups of 3 or 4 people. And Ruth and I will organize the people in the space. And for 15 minutes or so, you can just have a relaxed conversation. And what we've been talking about since early July is just this question about refuge. And just this honest question, as a human being, do I need a refuge, a spiritual refuge? And that's an open question. No one should tell us, yes, you need a refuge. And I just got the ticket for you, but it's $25. But it will work. But just to be curious, like, do I need a refuge? And then what's the alternative to not having a refuge? Well, it would be something like just letting everything rip, like letting the habits of my mind do what the habits of my mind are suggesting that I do. So the way I'm in relationship to my experience, to those around me, I just let the predominant habits, the habits that have the most momentum, call the shots. Happy to just let nature take its course. It almost sounds spiritual. Like, I just want to follow the habits of the mind. And basically people tried that. In a way, on the surface, it looks like the easy way because that's the force of habit. It's the predominant forces. Oh, why resist? And then if we see in our lives that hasn't really worked so well for ourselves or for those around us, then we might open to the possibility, you know what, I think I might have to train the mind. So instead of following the habits of the mind, we realize it's actually quite liberating, but it can be intimidating that the mind, whatever the mind is, which is for sure a mystery, one thing is for sure, it can be trained. Like, where did our current habit energies come from? Well, they were just conditioned in via impersonal conditioning processes, like being raised in the cultures, the conditioning circumstances that we were raised in, like by our parents, and the proximity to the friends and the culture that we were raised in. Well, we can participate in how this heart mind gets conditioned. We can cultivate new habits, can't we? And we can be aware, like one of the new habits we can cultivate is an awareness of the existing habits. And we can not only be aware of the existing tugs and impulses of the heart and mind, we can cultivate a particular way to frame those impulses, those habit energies. Oh, that's just a habit energy. It's not really me in the kind of normal way that I think of it. Like when I have a lustful impulse or an irritable, defensive, aversive impulse, and I see that, that's not really me. That's just a habit that's there. In a sense, I need to take responsibility for these tendencies of my mind, but it's not really correct for me to think that's me. I didn't choose to be irritable when I'm irritable. That pattern arose because of natural causes and conditions, like the habits got set in motion, got reinforced, and then there they are, those predominant tendencies of this mind. We have to live with it, we have to take responsibility, but we don't have to personalize it. And it really helps us have a more open and skillful relationship with our habit energies, to see them as impersonal forces. Much the same as when you show up and work in your job scenes, you realize, oh, there's this person with their set of habit energies and that person with that set of habit. And I'm not responsible for who they are or their habit energies, but I am responsible for coming into relationship with them, including leaving my job, if that's the way I'm going to be in relationship with them. Sometimes turning away, leaving, is the way we choose to relate. Other times we relate by staying put and discovering more and less skillful ways to relate to this person's pattern or that pattern of that person, right? It's not like it's just one pattern in each person. They have their demons and their angels that come up depending on other impersonal triggers that show up for all of us. This goes back to this being a relational world. So when we get a sense that this is the world we live in, we realize I do need a refuge, because the alternative is for us to be swept away or pushed around. I'm being triggered. When I'm triggered, some predominant habit then manifests. That generally triggers others. That triggers their strong habit energies, which trigger me. This is the endlessness of samsara, right? That word, maybe you know it. It's like the simple translation of samsara, the endlessness of the cycles of suffering. How the experience of suffering causes stuff to happen that triggers more suffering. and there's an endlessness. One of the imponderables that the Buddha talks about, I think there were 3 of them, the sort of depth or liberation of wisdom, like our understanding, is an imponderable. You can't understand it conceptually. The power of a concentrated mind and the endlessness of karma and samsara. How suffering begets suffering, basically. Can't really be comprehended. It isn't like our normal understanding that there's a definitive beginning, a definitive end. It just keeps going on and on. And even in physics, like we thought, oh, there was a Big Bang, and there will be, whatever is at the end of the Big Bang, the big implosion or something. But then, the newer physics, it's like, no, it's not just one Big Bang. It's an endless process, right? No beginning, no end. It's a little bit like what we see when we watch the mind, the ongoingness of one thing leading to the next. So when we get this, then we realize, we really are in need of a refuge, a way of, a kind of something out of the box, because the normal way that we relate to seeing samsara is one of 2 ways, which is, I am going to get on top of this. I'm going to finally control. Every relationship in my life is going to be perfect. I will exterminate all the messiness. Sometimes we think about certain societies. I have never been to Singapore, but it has a reputation of 1, being oppressive, and 2, being tidy, as at least the city seems, And so this is sort of our, like, okay, we're gonna be that controlling type and really get it together. And either we've been that person and know how oppressive that is, or we've lived or been friends with someone like that and know how oppressive it is, right? And the other is, just sort of giving up in the route of distractedness. Let me just jump from one absorption, this hobby, this sport, this nice media, get absorbed, so that I don't really take the time to feel what it feels like to be a human being and to have a sensitive heart. That would be my strategy. So that's the alternative to this humble search. As I mentioned, I think a couple of weeks ago, who knows something about what to do? And the Buddha, he has a pointing out, well, we don't understand what this is well enough to know how to relate to this. So the first thing we have to do is we have to find ways to stabilize, to cultivate the heart, the mind that can see clearly, or that can be open with no filter, no agenda, no frame. So this practice of mindful awareness is, first and foremost, we need to find a relatively safe time and place where we can experiment, not trying to make something happen, but just being present, just being open. Because as I mentioned in the guided meditation today, we can't both be trying to control or fix or get somewhere and really seeing, feeling the way it is. Because the expectation, the striving, the trying to get somewhere gets in the way, it distorts the way it is. So like I always use the example of a naturalist. If you're going to be a really good naturalist, you don't create an artificial environment, like if we took a raccoon from the west side of the Mississippi River, which is real close to common ground here, and put it in a cage in a laboratory, we're not going to see very naturalistic behaviors of the raccoon, because the way to really get what a raccoon is to sit quietly in a relaxed way that doesn't trigger the raccoon in its own environment, and let the raccoon be a raccoon. If we want to know what the heart is, the mind is, and the body is, this life is, the world is, we have to put aside some time. And those times, you're not a parent, you're not an activist, you're not for or against anything, except it's like we're sort of this embodied sensitivity, receptivity, this embodied openness, right? So we're using the natural sensitivity of the mind and heart to let the world, let the moment, let the experience of our mind, the experience of our body, let it, in a sense, land in the sensitivity of the body, heart, and mind. Oh, it's like this now, feels like this now. In a way, we're learning how to collect clean data. It's the hardest thing in the world. It's like, have you noticed, those of you who raise kids, or those of you who've had a long-term partner, or those of you who've had a pet, or those of you who have had a life, have you noticed that when we're interacting or relating, how hard it is not to have an agenda? I was looking through some Carlos Castaneda quotes. I don't know if people know him. It's funny. He was such a big deal back when I was a young adult. And now maybe there's people who don't know him, but he wrote a series of books about his, I guess I should say, alleged teacher, because there's some controversy whether Don Juan, his teacher, who was a shaman from Mexico, indigenous shaman from Mexico, truly existed, or is a combination of different people, or not at all a person, but just Carlos Castaneda's own musings. I'm not sure, but for, at least in my case, and I think I speak for a lot of people, there was a lot of useful wisdom in those books, at least back then. But I came across this one. Let's see if I can find it. One was, it takes all the time and energy we have to conquer the idiocy in us. Oh, here it is. The hardest thing in the world is for a warrior, and he uses the word warrior. Don Juan, Carlos's teacher. So Carlos, by the way, was a PhD anthropologist somewhere, maybe UCLA or one of those universities in Southern California. And he wrote his dissertation about his interactions with Don Juan. And so his teacher, Don Juan, said, the hardest thing in the world is for a warrior to let others be. And it's true. And we could expand that to say the hardest thing for us practitioners is to let the moment be, to let the feeling and the heart be, which is, like I mentioned at the beginning of the guided sit, to be willing to be a humble student and let our teacher, which is the moment, the movement of the moment, to let the movement, the way it is, be the way it is, to leave its impression on the sensitive heart. And we become, instead of becoming this solid certainty, arrogant certainty, okay, I know the way, I know what I should do, I know who I am, I know what's bad, I know what's good. We only really have the sense of how to respond in this moment from this tender-hearted, you could even say, I think, broken, wounded, vulnerable, sensitive place. And because we're willing to be uncertain, willing to acknowledge that I don't know, then we can actually have a more honest sense of what's moving, so that our response, which sometimes will need to be a really assertive response in the moment, like we'll actually need to say something loud, and do something powerful, but it's going to come from that tender-hearted, exposed, vulnerable place. Because that's where we connect. That's where we feel. And then our response is coming from that breadth and depth of that connection. But whenever we feel like we got a plan, we got a good map, I know what I'm doing, then to that degree, to the degree of certainty, is the degree of disconnection. Because certainty is never connection. Certainty, whenever we feel certain, there's a fixedness to that. And the mind is identified with an idea. And on the surface, it can give us a sense of direction and a sense of power, but it's fragile because it depends on disconnection. And so we got to we don't necessarily see this or even feel this because it's buried, but we're always protecting our certainty of being right. Like I got the way. And this is really the root of any kind of fundamentalism, right? It's that endless patching up, endless reasserting, endless need for other people to share our belief. Because there's vulnerability, there's fragility and weakness and certainty. And that's a hard lesson for us to learn. Even cynicism is a kind of arrogant certainty, isn't it? That's not it either. And this is the amazing thing that we learn the hard way, all of us, the long and hard way, which is that tenderness, that softness, that vulnerability allows for the capacity to be connected, to be real, not optimistic and not pessimistic, but real, really connected. And then we find a way, but it's never a complete plan. It's only one moment at a time. And, this relates to what I was saying about Dana, living with generosity, living with that circle of giving and receiving. It's like, I often use the example like how I'm just speaking from my own personal experience. When I run into those folks who are often sit on the side of roads asking for money, I often feel the need to defend myself with a plan. I'm not going to give money to them because a lot of them are addicts and I don't want to encourage their addictive behaviors. I got a plan. But if I feel my heart, that doesn't feel good to have that plan because it's a way of me disconnecting. Like what's really going on is that I'm not trying to keep them from drugs and alcohol. What's really going on is I don't know how and I don't want to feel what I feel in that situation. So I get an idea. I don't want to support their addictions. And I'm going to hold to it. And I'm going to make it work until it doesn't work because it's too heavy. And then, okay, begrudgingly, I'll do something. For a lot of years, I always had, some of you know, because I used to talk about it, I used to have little nice granola bars or protein bars that I would give people because I just wanted to have some interaction. It was a useful step, but it was still a lot of the time a way to avoid feeling what I was feeling. Like I've got a way to manage this uncomfortable, awkward situation because I'll give them something. It will be over in a few seconds and I can go on and I won't be haunted by being the jerk who was addicted to the idea that I don't want to do anything. And so what I try to do, and I find it the hardest thing to do, is not to know, not to have a plan, but to have an authentic, and I don't consider myself successful at this, by the way, but to have a successful interaction, human interaction, and not have a plan what that's going to look like or feel like. And don't tell myself what to do or what not to do. And I'm assuming this is not uncommon, that some of you have that same experience. Like this is really one of those hard things to do. But for me, it really feels like it's in the right direction. All those places we feel like the appropriate response is for us to run, to hide, to have a fundamentalist view that we hold to, like around politics. This person's wrong and this person's right. Well, you know where that leads us? The United States of America, where we got strong views and we're just living in different universes most of the time. And it's really doesn't work very well. And there's a lot of suffering. So this practice then is, if we do need a refuge, then one thing to explore, and you could begin in the small groups, is just that place of vulnerability. Where in your lives, where in the different experiences, the different locations that you live, relationships that you're in, have you more successfully embodied that openness, that vulnerability, that not being dependent on a fixed view, a fixed idea, a fixed way of relating, but it feels more alive and scary, but scary in a good way. And because of that vividness, there's more nimbleness, more creativity, and the after flavor is tastes like freedom. Like, that felt pretty good. That felt pretty real. No, don't feel haunted by what just happened. Oh, I did that, I said that. But I notice that more and more, even when I do something really awkward or what in the past might be humiliating, I feel more and more, I feel this is definitely the fruit of 40 some years of practice now, is the aftertaste of even awkward, difficult interactions is just that beautiful confidence that that's about as good as it could have gone. Not that oh, you did that perfectly, Mark, but yeah, given the mess of everything, given the complexity of the conditioned habits of this mind, which is not personal, that this heart mind was conditioned by this culture. It's that's not my responsibility in a sense, but I got to live with it. I got to find a creative way not to harm myself or others, given my conditioning, around being a male, identified as a male or white, or all these ways that the conditioning I have to learn to creatively live with in our culture. It's always going to be messy. But more and more, just that quality of forgiveness and patience and humility and knowing that it isn't over, and that freedom doesn't depend on this personality being perfect or this world, whatever orbit, like my family life world or the Common Ground world or the Minneapolis world, or that none of these worlds have to be perfect. We don't have to postpone freedom. We can just start uncovering it one little relationship at a time. Oh, this is what freedom feels like, looks like here and now. And the mind, wisdom starts to generalize what we're learning in little relationships, interactions, and I mentioned this earlier, often it's the more neutral interactions, like somebody at a checkout line and we have a 35-second interaction, but it was very real and simple and loving and uncontrived. You weren't the person trying to be compassionate, which is a heavy load. You were just nature, love, interacting with the nature of love. And it was beautiful, nothing heavy left over, just flowers and wholesome scents and, right? Something beautiful. And the more of those little interactions that often begin to happen in more simple, ordinary, safe, not intense situations, then the heart, mind, wisdom begins to generalize the underlying principle, like how it is that those moments, what are the supporting conditions that allow those moments to be the way they are. Oh, there was no fear there. There was no fixed somebody trying to do it right. There was just sensitivity, like the heart totally invested in being present, not totally invested in doing it right, but totally invested in being real, sensitive, open. Because that's how we end up doing it right, skillfully. Not by trying to do it right, but by being sensitive, which means being vulnerable. Because sensitivity requires that we drop any arrogant certainty. So this would be a great topic for the small groups today. Where are those places where for sure you're not ready to drop your arrogant certainty and you feel very dependent on your fixed views? That would be great to share in the small groups. And where are those places, often more simple, ordinary places, where you've had experience of really being vulnerable and not dependent on knowing anything, knowing who you are even. That the dance, the interaction was all there was. And that felt safe enough, not perfectly safe, but safe enough to trust it enough to taste the aftertaste, which was, well, that feels pretty good. Maybe this is the way that the Buddha points out, that our wise elders point out for us. So I'll leave it here. Really nice to be with everybody today. And again, thanks to Jessica and Ruth here in the building and Shannon now, who will lead